Lucas grew up surrounded by luxury, in a mansion where every detail reflected power and wealth. The only son of a business empire, he was used to having his every wish granted without delay. His cold blue eyes radiated arrogance, and his imposing presence made others bow their heads in his presence. At 28, he believed nothing could shake his position at the top of society. At the parties he hosted, Lucas loved to flaunt his wealth in front of his guests. The ballroom was always filled with politicians, business people, and celebrities, all eager to be close to the heir. He fed off the flattery, believing it was a sign of genuine respect. In reality, he didn't realize he was surrounded by people who only wanted something from him. Despite his imposing demeanor, Lucas was known for his explosive temper. The smallest mistake was enough to make him react with humiliation and yelling. His staff lived in constant tension, always afraid of becoming the target of his anger. Fear was what kept his household running, not admiration or affection. Among the employees was a young woman named Sofia, who worked as a housekeeper. Quiet and dedicated, she always did her best to avoid drawing attention. Unlike the others, Sofia didn't bow in flattery, but treated Lucas with professional respect. This, however, annoyed the billionaire, who saw her calm demeanor as a silent challenge. That evening, Lucas was hosting a business dinner for important investors. The mansion was impeccable, and the atmosphere exuded sophistication. Lucas wore an elegant suit and flashed his calculated smile, ready to impress. Everyone was eager to please him, reinforcing his sense of superiority. Yet, behind his confident facade, Lucas carried an emptiness he himself didn't understand. His world was built on appearances, and any crack in that image enraged him. To him, mistakes weren't just errors, they were personal offenses. That's why he couldn't tolerate slip-ups, especially at social events. The guests raised glasses of champagne, discussing investments and celebrating multi-million-dollar partnerships. The mood was light, but charged with competition and showiness. Lucas, as always, was the center of attention, enjoying every second of the admiration around him. To him, this was the perfect stage to display his flawless life. But perfection was fragile, and Lucas knew it. Any sign of weakness could tarnish his image in front of the powerful. That's why his posture was always rigid and calculated. In his world, showing vulnerability was unthinkable, and he took pride in never allowing it to happen. As he chatted with a group of business people, Lucas felt a bitter satisfaction. He didn't care who they really were, only what they could do for him. That's how he saw people, pieces in a game he believed he controlled perfectly.
That evening, however, something unexpected would happen. A seemingly insignificant detail would be enough to trigger a situation that would forever change the course of his life. And that detail would come from the hands of Sofia, the housekeeper he silently looked down on. Can you believe life can transform even the most arrogant hearts? Then subscribe to the channel now and follow this moving story of redemption and true love. Sofia was in charge of serving the guests during the dinner. Her movements were delicate, the result of years of experience on the job. As she balanced a tray of crystal glasses, her heart raced, because she knew any mistake would not be forgiven. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. In a moment of distraction caused by the crowd, Sofia stumbled slightly on a rug, and one of the glasses slipped off the tray. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hall, and every pair of eyes turned toward her. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the world had stopped for an instant. Lucas, who had been talking animatedly, turned immediately. His expression turned to pure contempt. He walked over to Sofia, who was already bending down to pick up the pieces, and his voice rang out, firm and cruel. "You can't even hold the glass properly. Is this what I pay you for? You should be ashamed of embarrassing yourself like this in front of respectable people." The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, some laughing quietly, others just watching in silence. Sofia, her face flushed, kept her head down and continued gathering the shards without responding to his cutting words. Her dignity remained intact even under the weight of public humiliation. Satisfied with having reasserted his power, Lucas turned back to the investors. "I apologize for that ridiculous display. It's so hard to find competent help these days." His remark drew forced laughter from the crowd, as if everyone felt they had to laugh to please him. Inside, Sofia felt the sting of injustice, but also a quiet strength. She wouldn't allow that moment to define her. As she picked up the last fragments of glass, she promised herself she wouldn't let Lucas's arrogance break her. She stood up, took a deep breath, and continued with her work. To Lucas, it had been just another show of authority. He felt empowered by humiliating someone in front of others, as if it boosted his prestige. He didn't realize that, in truth, he was revealing his own fragility and insecurity to everyone. The guests resumed their conversations, trying to ease the tension hanging in the air. But some whispered among themselves, uncomfortable with Lucas's aggressiveness. The arrogance he believed was respectable was slowly starting to create quiet disgust. Sofia finished her shift in silence, maintaining her professionalism until the end of the night. But deep down, the wound was open. She would never forget those words, etched into her memory like a scar. As she retreated to the staff quarters, Sofia had no idea that fate was about to turn the tables. Soon, the man who had humiliated her in public would depend on her for his very survival. The morning after the dinner, Lucas woke up ready to tackle another busy day of appointments. The sky was cloudy, but he paid no attention to the weather. He got into his sports car, speeding through the streets as if he owned time and space itself. The speed gave him a sense of absolute control. His phone kept buzzing non-stop with business messages and meeting reminders. He got distracted for a few seconds reading a notification, and that moment of carelessness was all it took. A truck braked suddenly in front of him, and Lucas couldn't react in time. The impact was devastating, sending his car crashing into the guardrail. The sound of twisting metal and shattering glass filled the air. The world of luxury and control Lucas had always known collapsed in seconds. His body was trapped in the wreckage, and intense pain shot through every muscle. The shouts of pedestrians and distant sirens were the last things he heard before losing consciousness. Hours later, Lucas opened his eyes in a hospital room. The bright white lights blurred his vision, and the smell of disinfectant filled the air. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. Panic set in, and tears of desperation welled in his eyes, something he would never have allowed himself to show in public. The doctors were straightforward. Lucas had spinal injuries and would be temporarily confined to a wheelchair. The diagnosis felt like a death sentence to someone who had always prized his image of perfection. For the first time, he saw himself as vulnerable, powerless, and dependent on others. Isabella appeared by his side. At first, she tried to show affection, but her gestures felt forced. Still groggy, Lucas believed he could count on her support to face the most difficult moment of his life. Little did he know that this faith would soon be shattered. The following days were emotionally torturous. Lucas couldn't accept his new condition, and the mirror reflected a broken man, a far cry from the arrogant heir he once was. Visits became less frequent, and the pitying glances hurt him more than the physical pain. The feeling of losing control was suffocating. He, who had always despised weakness, was now drowning in it. He felt mocked by fate, as if the universe had decided to punish his arrogance. In that lonely hospital room, Lucas began to question what was truly left in his life. The money, the parties, the yes men, none of them were there to comfort him. For the first time, he faced the truth. He was completely alone.
In the first few days after the accident, Isabella made brief visits to the hospital. She always arrived looking flawless, perfectly made up and well-dressed, as if she were the very picture of perfection. But her impatience was obvious. She'd hold Lucas's hand for a few minutes, exchange a few shallow words, and quickly find an excuse to leave. Lucas tried to hold on to her, believing her love would be the anchor that kept him steady. But with each visit, she grew colder. Isabella avoided talking about the future and looked away whenever the topic of his recovery came up. The billionaire, who was once a symbol of power, now felt like a burden too heavy for her to carry. On a rainy afternoon, Lucas watched her in silence. Isabella was hurriedly scrolling through her phone, showing no interest in conversation. He gathered his courage and asked, "Do you still love me, Isabella?" The silence that followed was more painful than any answer. She sighed and said indifferently, "Lucas, you have to understand. I can't tie myself to this situation. I need someone strong by my side, someone who can keep up with the life I deserve." Her words cut through him like knives. The mask of perfection had fallen. Isabella wasn't concerned with his pain, only with how his condition would affect her own life. To her, love was disposable, conditional on the image of success that Lucas once represented. When she walked out of the room without even saying a proper goodbye, Lucas felt the ground collapse beneath him. For the first time, he cried without caring who might see. His pride had shattered, and all that remained was a wounded and abandoned man. The following days confirmed his worst fears. Her visits became even less frequent until they stopped completely. Isabella wasn't coming back. She had chosen the easiest path, abandoning someone who was no longer useful to her. Alone, Lucas began to feel the full weight of her betrayal. The woman he thought loved him had turned out to be just another player in the cruel game wealth fuels. His spirit sank into despair. But fate, which had so often handed him privileges, was now preparing a different kind of lesson. And that lesson would come from the one person he least expected. Sofia, the woman he had humiliated without mercy. The silence in his hospital room grew more and more unbearable. The flowers sent out of obligation had begun to wilt, and the visitors who once filled the space were gone. Lucas, who was used to being the center of attention, was now forgotten. Isabella's absence was the most painful wound, proof of what he feared most. No one would stay by his side without something to gain. In the first days after the breakup, Lucas refused to believe it. He tried to justify his fiancée's absence with excuses: work commitments, trips, lack of time. But deep down, he knew the truth. Isabella wasn't coming back. The woman who once proudly showed off his status now saw no use in a man confined to a wheelchair.
The emptiness consumed his nights. He remembered the glamorous dinners, the camera flashes, and the shallow admiration. Now it all felt distant, like a faded dream. For the first time, Lucas realized his entire life had been built on fragile foundations, held up only by the appearance of power. Anger began to mix with despair. How could she just leave me like this, he wondered. But soon that anger gave way to pain. It wasn't just about Isabella. It was about everyone he thought cared. Where were his friends? Where were the people who used to flatter him?
None of them remained. The doctors talked about rehabilitation, but Lucas didn't want to hear it. Every word felt like a reminder of his new reality. He who had always despised weakness was now drowning in it. The mirror showed him a broken man, a far cry from the confident heir he once was. In a moment of despair, he even yelled at a nurse who tried to help him stand. He couldn't stand depending on anyone. His arrogance, once his armor, had now become a weight dragging him down even further. The hospital felt like a prison. The sound of machines, the hurried footsteps in the halls, and the smell of antiseptic constantly reminded him of his vulnerability. Lucas withdrew into silence, rejecting any attempt to connect. But in the midst of that darkness, a familiar face appeared. It wasn't Isabella, nor any of his so-called friends. It was Sofia, the housekeeper he had publicly humiliated. Fate, with its cruel irony, had brought her back to him. She entered the room quietly, with the same calmness she'd always carried. There was no judgment in her eyes, only compassion. Lucas, surprised, didn't know whether to feel shame or relief. The man who once looked down on her now depended on her. And as unbelievable as it seemed, Sofia was willing to help. Sofia approached Lucas with steady steps and a calm expression. Her presence brought a sense of peace, contrasting sharply with the storm raging inside him. Without harsh words or reminders of past hurts, she simply asked, "Do you need anything?" It was in that simple gesture that Lucas's transformation began. In the first few days, he resisted. His pride wouldn't let him accept help from someone he had humiliated. He tried to push her away with sharp remarks, but Sofia wouldn't be shaken. She did what needed to be done with dignity, never lowering herself, but never acting superior either. She helped him eat, adjusted his position in bed, read documents aloud when he didn't have the strength. She did it all without ever showing pity. What Sofia offered wasn't charity, it was respect, something Lucas wasn't used to receiving in its truest form.
One evening, in a moment of anger, he asked her, "Why are you here? Why don't you despise me the way I despised you?" Sofia looked at him calmly and replied, "Because I don't take pleasure in someone else's pain. I'm not the person you were to me." Her words cut through Lucas like a knife, but at the same time, they stirred something new in him. Little by little, he began to notice the details. The way Sofia treated everyone in the hospital with kindness, her patience in dealing with his angry outbursts, how she could still smile even after long, exhausting days. There was a quiet strength in her that stood in stark contrast to his own fragility. Lucas began to feel a mix of shame and admiration. He had never truly noticed Sofia before. To him, she had always just been part of the backdrop of his mansion. Now, though, he saw something in her that he had never found in his world of luxury: humanity. While Isabella had left him because she couldn't handle his condition, Sofia stayed by his side without asking for anything in return. It confused him. Money didn't motivate her. Status didn't impress her. What kept her there was something much simpler: integrity. One morning, after a night of intense pain, he woke to find Sofia asleep in a chair beside his bed. She had stayed through the night, making sure he wasn't alone. Seeing her there, a tear rolled down Lucas's face. In that moment, he began to understand. Maybe life was offering him a second chance, and that chance had a name: Sofia. His days in the hospital became a battlefield, not just for his body, but for his soul.
Every time he needed Sofia's help with something simple, like drinking water or getting out of bed, a wave of shame washed over him. The man who once prided himself on being untouchable now depended on someone he had looked down on. He struggled with anger and self-pity. Sometimes he yelled at Sofia for no reason. Other times, he withdrew into silence, trapped inside an invisible armor. Deep down, he didn't know how to face this new reality. His suffering wasn't just physical. It was the realization that his arrogance had pushed away everyone who might have stood by him. One afternoon, the doctor mentioned physical therapy. He said the next few months would be crucial for Lucas's recovery. Lucas just shook his head, defeated. "What's the point?" he mumbled. But Sofia, firm and steady, replied, "The point is, you are still alive. What you do with that life is up to you." Her words echoed in his mind like a truth he had never wanted to hear.
One morning, Sofia brought him a book and said, "Read this out loud. It'll help your focus." Lucas scoffed, but gave in. As he read, he noticed her watching him with a faint smile, as if she saw something in him beyond the broken man in front of her. That feeling, strange and new, stirred something in his heart. Lucas's inner conflict grew. Torn between wounded pride and gratitude, he felt lost. Part of him wanted to push her away so he wouldn't have to face the shame of depending on her. Another part, though, longed for Sofia's presence, for the quiet comfort only she seemed to offer. He began to realize it wasn't the paralysis that trapped him, it was the arrogance he carried. The wheelchair was just a symbol of his fragility. The real prison was in his mind, and maybe Sofia held the key to setting him free. At that point, Lucas still didn't have the courage to admit he was changing. But in his heart, a seed had been planted, one that would grow with the revelation yet to come. While Lucas fought his inner battle, the business world moved on without him. His business partner, Ricardo, had temporarily taken over some of his responsibilities. At first, Lucas believed he could trust him. After all, they'd been friends for years. But as days passed, a bitter truth began to surface. One day, Lucas received an unexpected visit from a former employee. He brought documents revealing suspicious transactions led by Ricardo, fraudulent contracts, money being moved under the table, and worst of all, signs that he was planning to take control of the company. Lucas could hardly believe what he was reading. The shock deepened when he discovered Isabella was involved. Photos and messages showed the two of them together in secret meetings, scheming behind his back. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. The man he called a friend and the woman he thought loved him had turned against him. When the truth sunk in, Lucas felt as if the ground had vanished beneath him. His heart raced, not from physical pain, but from the weight of the betrayal. Lying in his hospital bed, he whispered, "So that's it. I was never loved. Just used." Sofia, who stood beside him, held his hand. "Not everyone is like that, Lucas. Not everyone." Her presence was his only comfort in that moment. If shame had once kept him from valuing Sofia, it was now her loyalty that gave him strength. While Isabella and Ricardo abandoned him in their pursuit of power, Sofia stayed by his side, expecting nothing in return. Lucas began to see people differently. The luxury and flattery he once loved now felt empty. What truly mattered was in the sincerity of simple gestures, like the glass of water Sofia brought without being asked, or the patience she showed during his lowest moments. The anger he felt toward Ricardo and Isabella mixed with the growing desire for justice. For the first time, Lucas wasn't just thinking about revenge, he wanted to reclaim his life with dignity. He didn't just want to expose the traitors, he wanted to prove to himself that he was no longer the arrogant man he used to be.
With Sofia by his side, he began to map out a plan in his mind. He knew he would need time, strength, and intelligence to confront his partner and reclaim what was his. But deep down, a certainty was growing. He was no longer alone. Ricardo and Isabella's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also pushed him toward an inevitable transformation. Lucas couldn't go back to who he was before. The man who would emerge from this pain would be completely different from the one who had once humiliated Sofia in front of everyone. After uncovering the betrayal, Lucas spent days in deep reflection. For the first time, he wasn't seeking distractions in parties or applause. Instead, he began to look inward, facing his own flaws. The arrogance that once defined him now seemed grotesque, and regret grew heavier with each passing day. Sofia was key to this process. She encouraged him to get up, to try taking steps, even when the pain felt unbearable. "It's not just your body that needs to heal, Lucas, it's your soul, too," she would say with calm strength. Words he once would have ignored now fueled his determination. During physical therapy, Lucas pushed himself harder every day. The painful exercises became symbols of his progress. Every small improvement was met not with arrogance, but with gratitude. Sofia was always nearby, offering support through simple yet powerful gestures. At the same time, he began taking interest in the stories of other patients who were also facing limitations. He discovered an invisible world of people living daily with obstacles, yet possessing remarkable strength. These interactions opened his eyes to a reality he had never considered before. One night, alone in his room, Lucas reflected on how far he'd come. The man who had humiliated Sofia was fading away, making room for someone more human. The accident, the betrayal, and the loneliness had shattered his armor, revealing a vulnerable heart, but one willing to change. This rebirth wasn't quick or easy. He still got frustrated, still felt shame, still cried in silence. But something was different. Now he was fighting to become better, not just to maintain an image of perfection. During one therapy session, he managed to take a few steps with support. When he looked over at Sofia, he noticed quiet tears in her eyes. In that moment, he understood he wasn't just regaining his movement. He was finding a new purpose in life. Lucas began exploring ways to use his wealth differently. Instead of spending on unnecessary luxuries, he thought about projects that could help people facing challenges like his. The idea was still taking shape, but it already gave him a new sense of direction. Lucas's rebirth wasn't just about his physical recovery. It was about rediscovering his essence, the awakening of a man who was beginning to understand that true strength lies in lifting others up, not in putting them down.
And by his side, Sofia became more than just his caregiver. She was the inspiration lighting the way on this journey. Spending every day together, Lucas and Sofia began forming an unexpected bond. What started as gratitude was slowly turning into something deeper. Lucas found himself looking forward to their conversations, her simple but thoughtful advice, and even the comfortable silences they shared. He started asking about her life. He learned that Sofia came from a humble family, that she worked hard to support her sick mother, and that even through all the hardship, she never lost hope. Her strength and dignity left Lucas in awe. He felt small in comparison. Over time, the way they looked at each other began to change. Lucas noticed his heart beating faster when she smiled, and Sofia, though reserved, showed her affection in subtle ways. A relationship that once seemed impossible was now quietly blooming. One afternoon, as Lucas struggled to walk down the hospital hallway, he stumbled and nearly fell. Sofia rushed to steady him. Breathless, he held tightly to her hand and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." The silence that followed was filled with emotion, but neither of them needed words to understand what was growing between them. Their connection grew because it was built on honesty. Sofia didn't flatter him or treat him like he was above her. She treated him like a person, and that was new for Lucas, who was used to relationships based on self-interest. Still, the shadow of the past lingered. Lucas knew the wound from the humiliation he'd caused Sofia wouldn't easily fade. She may have forgiven, but forgetting was another matter. That thought weighed heavily on him. Even so, day by day, something special was taking shape. They shared laughter, quiet conversations, and even disagreements. What they had was real, full of humanity, nothing like the shallow connections he'd known before. To Lucas, Sofia was no longer just a helper. She had become her partner, her friend, and maybe even more. Deep down, he began to imagine a future with her. But these new feelings wouldn't be easily accepted. The past still had a say, and the conspiracy led by Ricardo and Isabella was about to reach its peak. After weeks of intense recovery, Lucas decided it was time to return to the company. Even leaning on crutches, he walked into the building with quiet confidence. Employees watched with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Some whispered, doubting he could lead again. But Lucas wasn't interested in proving his power through arrogance anymore. He saw everything with new eyes. He noticed the effort of the junior staff, greeted people he used to ignore, and even thanked others for small kindnesses. He was a man transformed.
The first meeting was a real test. Ricardo, brimming with confidence, ran the meeting as if he were the true owner. Lucas stayed calm, listening to every word, but he held close the evidence of betrayal he'd already gathered. He wouldn't act rashly. He'd wait for the right moment to make his move. During the meeting, Ricardo hinted that Lucas should step down as chairman for good, suggesting his physical condition could damage the company's image. Some executives agreed, and the atmosphere grew tense. But instead of lashing out like he would have before, Lucas simply smiled. "Thank you for your concern," he said calmly. "But I can assure you, my mind is sharper than ever. What really matters in a leader isn't how fast they can walk, it's how clearly they can think." His words took everyone by surprise. Ricardo, clearly uncomfortable, forced a fake smile. It was obvious Lucas had changed, and that change made him even more dangerous to the traitor's plans. After the meeting, Lucas sat alone in his old office. He looked out the window at the city he once ruled with arrogance. Now, he saw every building and every person as part of a world he wanted to transform, not exploit. Sofia entered quietly, bringing coffee. "You did well today," she said with pride. Lucas looked at her and smiled. "I only managed it because you believed in me." Returning to the company wasn't just a business move. It was a sign that Lucas was ready to face his past and build a different future. But he knew the battle against Ricardo and Isabella was only beginning. A few days later, Lucas received an anonymous envelope in his office. Inside were copies of falsified contracts and emails that proved the alliance between Ricardo and Isabella. The evidence left no room for doubt. They were siphoning company funds and planning to sell part of the business to foreign investors, leaving Lucas with no power. The shock was deep, though not unexpected. Lucas had suspected it, but seeing the proof right in front of him was devastating. Even more painful were the photos Isabella and Ricardo together, smiling during what looked like romantic outings. The personal betrayal cut as deep as the professional one. Sofia found Lucas holding the documents, visibly shaken. He tried to hide his tears, but she approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "They don't deserve to destroy you, Lucas. Not after everything you've already been through." He took a deep breath and replied, "I don't just want to defeat them, Sofia.
I want to show the world who I really am now." With the help of a trusted lawyer, Lucas began preparing a strategy. His plan wasn't just legal, it was moral. He wanted to expose the two of them for who they really were, without resorting to the arrogance that once defined him.
As he gathered evidence, he found himself thinking about the past. If he were still the same man he used to be, he would have reacted with rage, seeking revenge at any cost. But now, he wanted justice, and more than anything, he wanted to prove to himself that he had truly changed. Tension grew with each passing day. Ricardo could sense that Lucas was standing firmer and tried to speed up his schemes. Isabella, in turn, spread rumors that her ex-fiancé was no longer fit to run anything. Both of them believed victory was within reach. What they didn't know was that Lucas already had everything he needed, and at the next board meeting, their conspiracy would be exposed for everyone to see. As he prepared for the confrontation, Lucas thought of Sofia. He went to her and said, "When this is over, I want you by my side, not just as a friend, but as someone I truly trust." Sofia, moved, simply nodded. The look in her eyes told him everything. This was no longer the arrogant billionaire who had once humiliated her, but a man reborn. The boardroom was filled with executives, lawyers, and shareholders. Ricardo walked in with his usual confidence, carrying folders and rehearsed speeches. Isabella, as elegant as ever, quietly took a seat in the back, certain she was about to witness Lucas's defeat. Lucas entered with steady steps, leaning on his crutches. His expression showed calmness, not the pride everyone remembered. After the formal greetings, Ricardo began the meeting, steering the discussion toward the proposal to sell part of the company. "It's the best way to ensure stability, especially since our chairman is facing certain limitations," Ricardo said with a suggestive tone. A few people chuckled quietly. Others looked away. That's when Lucas stood up, leaning on the table. In a firm voice, he began, "The real limitation of a company isn't its leader, it's the lack of character in those who run it." A heavy silence fell over the room. Lucas opened a folder and spread across the table the documents that exposed the conspiracy. Altered contracts, illegal transfers, and messages revealing the affair between Ricardo and Isabella. With each page displayed, Ricardo's face grew pale, and Isabella avoided eye contact. Personal and professional betrayal. That's what you two represent. But today, everyone will see that I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to show that this company still has values. The directors exchanged shocked glances. Some who had been inclined to support Ricardo were now murmuring criticisms. Lucas's lawyer reinforced the accusations, making it clear that both could face legal consequences. Ricardo tried to fight back, but his voice trembled. "This is a setup." Lucas smiled calmly and replied, "The only setup here was yours, and it ends now." At the end of the meeting, the board voted to immediately remove Ricardo and Isabella from any involvement with the company. Their plan had completely fallen apart, and Lucas, more than ever, showed that he didn't need the arrogance of his past to succeed. Days after the confrontation, Lucas held a press conference. Journalists, curious onlookers, and even former critics were there, eager to hear from the billionaire who had exposed those who betrayed him. But what he had to say that day would surprise everyone. With Sofia quietly by his side, Lucas began his speech. He didn't talk about numbers, business, or power. Instead, he told his own story. The accident, the betrayal, the loneliness, and the transformation. His voice trembled at times, but it was steady in its sincerity. For years, I lived believing that wealth and status were everything. I humiliated people, especially those who least deserved it. And today, In front of everyone, I want to apologize." The room fell completely silent. Lucas turned to Sofia, who watched with emotion. "Sofia, I was cruel to you. I humiliated your dignity in front of people who applauded my arrogance. But when life broke me, you were the one who stayed. I owe you not only my recovery, but the discovery of what truly matters." Sofia, taken by surprise, couldn't hold back her tears. The audience, deeply moved, applauded the moment. Lucas then announced, "From now on, Sofia will not just be someone I'm grateful to. She will be my partner, my associate in a new project that will help people with disabilities regain their dignity and opportunities." The announcement resonated as a turning point. It wasn't just an act of generosity. It was public proof that Lucas had changed. The arrogant billionaire had given way to a man capable of acknowledging his mistakes and valuing those who truly mattered. As they left the event, Lucas looked at Sofia and said quietly, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." She smiled, holding his hand. That apology wasn't just personal redemption. It was the beginning of a new life, one where love and humility would guide every step. Months after the press conference, Lucas's life had completely changed. His mansion, once the setting for shallow parties, had become a meeting place for social projects. The arrogant heir from before had been replaced by a man committed to giving back to the world some of what he had received. Together with Sofia, they launched a foundation dedicated to supporting people with disabilities, regaining their dignity and opportunities. They named it New Chance, symbolizing not only his own transformation, but also the hope it represented for so many others. During the inauguration speech, Lucas spoke with emotion. "I've learned that true value isn't in what we possess, but in what we're able to give. This foundation is my way of repaying the second chance life gave me."
Sofia watched him closely, her heart full. She no longer saw the arrogant billionaire who had once humiliated her, but a man who had found the courage to rebuild himself. She, who had once been just an employee in his mansion, was now his partner in a mission that was changing lives. The press, which had once criticized him, now celebrated him. But to Lucas, the camera flashes and headlines no longer mattered. What truly fulfilled him was the smile on the faces of those receiving support, the gratitude in the eyes of everyone helped by the foundation. In his personal life, Lucas was also experiencing a new kind of love. His relationship with Sofia grew naturally, built on respect and honesty. There was no showiness, just the simplicity of two hearts that had found each other after so much pain. One night, walking through the foundation's garden, Lucas paused, looked up at the starry sky, and said to Sofia, "You know, I used to think I had everything, but only now do I realize I had nothing. I had to lose it all to learn what truly gaining means." Sofia smiled softly and replied, "And now you've gained something no one can take away, your humanity." His past of arrogance and contempt hadn't been erased, but it had been turned into a lesson. Lucas knew he could never undo his mistakes, but he could choose a different path from that point on. And so, the billionaire who had once humiliated a simple housekeeper found his redemption not in wealth, but in love, humility, and the desire to make a difference in the world. With Sofia by his side, he was finally ready to write a new story, one of hope, forgiveness, and true greatness. Lucas discovered that real value lies not in power, but in love and humility. And you, have you ever stopped to think about what truly matters in life? Subscribe now and don't miss more stories that touch the soul and show the power of transformation.